Okay, so we'll start so welcome everybody. We'll start sharing the screen and get the PowerPoint rolling. So my name is Scott Cochran. I'm the Director of Madison Youth and Family Services. Um, this is what we refer to as our um, State of the Youth presentation. It is largely or almost entirely based on the outcome of our most recent high school survey. So you're going to be hearing all the results and the data points, and we'll be looking at a lot of information and information that tracks towards the trends as well. So the next slide, Catherine. So just in terms of welcoming everyone here, we have on our panel tonight the Assistant Director for Community Support, that's Catherine Barden, and credit to Catherine, who is I would say the brains and all the technical behind the scenes work for this survey and as well as the presentation. Also on our panel tonight is Daniel Hand Principal TJ Salutary, also integral and not only tonight, but the entire process, soup to nuts, starting the survey, troubleshooting all of the pieces about delivering the survey. And we could not do this survey without him, the administration at the high school, as well as the admin council and specifically Dr. Craig Cook, our town superintendent. Joining us on our panel, we have Daniel Hand students. We have 5 wonderful Daniel Hand students who are going to be a part of the student panel later in the presentation. On our panel is Trip Rizzo and Nora Hughes. I'll just single them out because they are our representatives to the Youth and Family Services Board, our student reps. Also on our panel is Lily Howard, Chris Bonavita, and Millie Marcoux. And so in a representation of almost all the classes we have at the high school. And as we come into tonight, we want to sort of frame this in terms of looking at public health and public wellness, the social emotional wellness of our youth. And so I have a quote which really just points out how important health is in terms of it being at the center of all what we do. And if we have health, we have hope. Owen Arthur, by the way, was a prime minister of Barbados. I love the quote. Had to look up who Owen Arthur was or is, and I just thought it was a good quote to kind of bring us into this evening. And also before we move on to the rest of it, I would like to acknowledge, I don't know if they're on the call now, but I know that we did have registered our first selectwoman, Peggy Lyons, and she's joined by 2 Board of Selectmen, Jen Gordon and Paul Goldberg. For the Board of Finance tonight, we have registered, and I hope in attendance, Matt Gordon and Katie Stein. And from the Board of Ed, Seth Klaskin, Emily Rosenthal, and Stephen Pinn. So welcome everyone. And if you are here and you're part of the leadership of the town in any way, we're really glad to have you here and have you part of the conversation. So next slide, Catherine. So we represent Madison Youth and Family Services, and it's important as we come into this conversation that everyone understands and has some basis for who and what we are. So Youth and Family Services, we are actually an official town department. As the director of this town department, my direct report actually is to our first selectwoman, Peggy Lyons. The work that we do is grounded in state statute. The statute goes all the way back to the 1970s, but essentially a youth service bureau is defined as an agency or a multi-purpose coordinating unit of community-based services. Statute is way longer than that, but just for the understanding tonight, that's essentially what the statute speaks to. And the charge is to youth service bureaus across the state that you're charged with really evaluating all the community needs as they relate to youth and families, and could be broader than that to include, adult services as well in some cases. And so we are charged with evaluating the community needs, creating partnerships and collaborations across the community, and ultimately making sure that whatever is needed in the community is being provided. Youth service bureaus do take on sometimes to fill in the gaps and provide services. Like here in Madison, we have an outpatient mental health clinic, specifically and more recently focusing on services for kids under 10. That's been a huge shift in the demographic of kids needing outpatient clinical services. So here in Madison, we are doing that work. We are running quite a few prevention and youth development programs. And we also provide social services and drug and alcohol prevention, which includes, doing this survey. Specifically to the survey, this survey is a big part of how we evaluate the needs in this community. It is by far not the only piece of information or pieces of information that we take. We are working in a way that's very integrated into this community. So we are in constant contact with folks up and down the school system, other department heads, obviously parents and youth. And we are very much invested in keeping track of other state trends and things that are going on. So we are very much aware of what's going on. And by the way, most of the staff that work for Youth and Family Services actually live in this town or have some very close tie to this town. So many of us are working with the idea that we are helping our neighbors and people with whom we know and live. So the survey is a part. This survey is a part of that needs assessment, and I like to point out the best part of the data that we collect from this is now. It's the dialogue that comes about what the survey says and conversations about what a trend looks like or why it looks that way. Questions about like what how valid is a particular data point based on the fact that it came from a survey, and how much does a particular data point perhaps reflect a need, and obviously then what do we do with that need? So creating that dialogue, and I would encourage people to think of what they learned tonight really in two very broad ways. It's if you're a parent on this call, or you have young people that you're connected to, obviously if you have people that you care about, to be thinking on an individual family level to what this information means, how it maybe is reflected in your own child or your own family. And for all of us then also to be thinking about what this means for us as a community and what we need to be doing as a community in order to address some of the things you're going to learn about. We always want to be able to acknowledge and reinforce the strengths that we have. So it's the positive, healthy aspects of our culture that ultimately we want to promote and we want to create, because that really is what creates the culture. So for example, if we have 75% of our kids who report that they're not drinking on any regular basis, then we largely have a culture that does not support youth drinking. We still need to be concerned about that 25% that report that they are, but the key difference is speaking in terms of what we want the youth and the people in our community to understand as what we accept as our culture. And obviously, we want to foster change in areas where we're concerned about something. So next slide. So looking at the history and validity of the survey itself. So this is we have really two surveys. The main survey is the Search Institute survey on behaviors and attitudes. It's 160 questions in and of itself. And this is the survey we've done over many years. We have a 19 question addendum that was also given. And the reason for the addendum, there are some questions that we felt like needed to be asked in a different way, and maybe they were a little bit more specific to what we wanted to ask in this community. And so we added those questions. We can talk more if there's questions about the history of how we've done this in the past. It's just important for us to point out that this is the third year that we've done the survey as an online survey. So if you want to go to the next slide, Catherine. And I don't want to stay on this too long because I got to look at myself. And so what we did this year, and we also did this last year, we created a video that includes myself and Catherine, and also Trip and Nora, our two student reps, are on this video. And this was our way of helping to reassure the students that interacting with an online survey was safe. The first year that we did this, a lot of feedback was from the students that they were concerned that the online version of this could put them at risk, that somebody could track back their answers to their own IP address and they could either get in trouble or, not good things happen. That is, by the way, the furthest thing from the truth. And so after getting that feedback, we created this video. So this video plays on the day that they take the survey. It's 4 minutes. We're not going to play it here because it would take a little bit too much time. But what we do is we speak very directly to students to let them know what the survey is. We acknowledge its length and we thank them, show as much gratitude as we can. We talk about how we use the survey data, how they can use the survey data, and then we try as hard as we can. I'm almost standing on my head at the end, letting them know that we don't want to know who they are and taking the survey. And honest, we don't have any way or means technically or legally to track back an individual IP address. So next slide. We have so far, since doing the survey back in October, we've taken the results, talked with the admin council, with the Madison Public School System. We took some of the results and also created kind of like a focus group discussion with the student leadership at Daniel Hand. The data was also shared with one of our student leadership groups, our Girls United, and we shared a presentation with the Daniel Hand PTO. We are still in the midst of working with the advisory faculty leaders. So that's Ron Spears and Lindsay Fiandella and TJ Salutary at the high school. The way of getting the data back to the students in a way that they can interact with it and even respond to it in some ways is to do it in small groups. So we are, and this is the first time that we've really made a concerted effort to take data points and move them into student groups where they could talk about them. So that's in process now, and moving, picking out data points and creating questions and topics that they could talk about in their advisory groups. We still have in front of us a presentation specifically to the Board of Ed. We're going to present the data to the Daniel Hand faculty, and we've done that before, and that's that creates a very good dialogue and conversation about the data. And we've been using this with our Roots group. That's some of the students on our panel tonight are part of our Roots group. So we've been creating, and they've been creating student social media posts around the data. And lots, those are the highlights. There's a lot more than that too. Next slide, Catherine. All right, so in terms of tonight, I am going to kick this over to Catherine. She'll walk through the data itself. Our students are then going to talk in terms of some of the data points that they want to speak more specifically to. And at the end, we will cover all of the questions. So as you go through this, if you want to jot something down and then raise your hand and ask a verbal question later in the presentation, you can. If you want to put something in the Q&A option, that too would be a method of getting your question in, and we'll do our best to answer everything we can at the end. The sort of prompt to the data overall, we've got a pretty healthy community. We have a lot to be proud of. We're doing a lot right. The data tells us the majority of our kids are making good, healthy decisions. We do see some slight increases in terms of our substance use, except for cannabis, which is an interesting data point that Catherine will get into. Developmental assets. So what we really are measuring with the larger survey is the existence and health of our developmental assets. And these are really the model that we use that look at the building blocks to a healthy community. And without going into more detail, I think it'll become clear as you go through the presentation, what some of them mean. But all in all, our developmental assets, we did see a slight drop since the last survey, which was in 2021. And we have seen some minor improvements in some mental health areas. So with that, I'm going to hand this over. Did I miss anything, Catherine?
You did not.
Okay. So welcome everyone. Thank you. And Catherine will go into the data.
Awesome. So, there's a lot of numbers, so I apologize up front. There's a lot of graphs and lines and charts, but we're going to go through it, and then I promise we'll get to the wonderful students that I know you guys are here to see. But I just want to go over some of the trends that we've been seeing, because as Scott said, really when we're looking at survey data from year to year, we're looking for trends and patterns. So the overall trend in 30-day use over time, and this is going back to when we first started doing the surveys. Back in 2006, we used a different survey tool, but it was the first time that we had ever done any drug and alcohol survey for the student population. But if you look at that over time, of course, vaping and prescription drugs came in a little bit later because those were more emerging trends that had to be added to survey tools. But we're seeing from whatever our baseline survey data is to now, we're trending in the right direction and we're making a lot of progress, which is great news. So across the board, even though we're up a little bit this year, it is good that over time we've seen a pretty significant decrease in 30-day use of our substances. So again, the other important thing to know when we're looking at patterns is 2 years ago when we did the survey, it was 2021 and we were still kind of in the pandemic. So we saw a lot of things influenced by that, not just town-wide, but we compared it to our neighboring communities, we compared it to state data and federal data. And across the board in 2021, everybody saw a huge decrease in 30-day use across the board in all substances. And a lot of that had to do with the pandemic and people being more isolated and less social. So even if you were to look at 2021 as kind of a COVID blip, we're still seeing that our 30-day use over time is down from where it was pre-pandemic, which is a good thing. It is concerning to see that 25 to 31% jump in 30-day use of alcohol. And hopefully, it's still lower than pre-pandemic, but our goal is to try and get it back down to where it was even during the pandemic and to continue to bring those underage drinking rates back down. You'll see we saw a very slight increase in vaping. Cannabis use stayed the same, which was kind of a surprise. And, 10% seems very low. There's always the concern that, as Scott was mentioning, that somebody may not have been truthful because they're worried about getting in trouble. But the important thing to know, too, is if they were concerned about being honest based on how comfortable they felt in taking the survey, typically if they're going to lie, it tends to happen in patterns, and we're not seeing a huge increase, which means it looks to be about the same amount of usage that we saw 2 years ago. For tobacco use, again, that's down over time. It's been very consistent over the last 3 surveys. And prescription drugs, again, that low number rose slightly, but we're still right around 2%. So overall, we're doing really well. We need to get that underage drinking number back down. And continue to work on our 30-day use. The interesting thing that happened this year is something that we've never seen before in any of the years that we've been doing surveys, and that is that our sophomore class outdrank and outsmoked our junior class, which typically when we look at use over time, it's lowest for freshmen, goes up for sophomores, and there's usually a pretty decent jump between sophomores and juniors, because that's kind of the year that tends to be more stressful. They're more independent. They're getting their driver's license. And then you see another jump between junior and senior year. So it kind of mirrors what you're seeing this year in terms of vaping, but there's usually a bigger gap between sophomores and juniors. But this year we did see that our sophomore class was out drinking our junior class, which is a concern. Those sophomores in 2 years are going to be seniors, and next year they're going to be juniors, and again, more of them will be getting their driver's license, be independent. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on and know that that's a class that we need to do some work with. Cannabis use, obviously lowest for the freshmen, neck and neck between sophomores and juniors, up slightly for seniors. You can see for tobacco use, it was pretty much non-existent for freshmen, a little bit higher for sophomores than for juniors, and then highest for seniors. Prescription drug, there was some question on whether the freshmen truly understood the question when we went back and talked to student leadership, because they found it hard to believe that that the freshmen were out using the juniors and the sophomores in prescription drug use, and that's specifically for a prescription drug not prescribed to them. But we're also dealing with really low percentage points. So a couple students either way could really skew that data. And vaping, of course, lowest, more about one of our traditional bars of what we would see in terms of year to year, it going up over time. But really interesting to see what happened with the sophomore class and knowing that that's a class that we need to give a little attention to. One of the questions that pops up when we talk about that is, okay, so are the sophomores drinking more or are the juniors drinking less? And the answer is yes, both. So I just did a quick graph over time, year to year, in terms of what it looked like for 12th, 11th, 10th, and 9th graders. You can see the freshmen kind of went up and down a little bit. If you go back to 2017 and you go to 2023, both at 14%. There was a little high, a little low there. Seniors were similar, where it was trending downward and then came back up for this year. But you can see juniors over time have continued to climb down, which again is a good thing. We want to see that for all grades. But you'll also see the sophomores were trending down and then really spiked back up this year. And it went from, our sophomore class in 2021 was drinking at 16%. And now for 2023, it's at 36%. So a 20 percentage point difference between 2 years is pretty significant. So one of the things that we found interesting was the fact that our cannabis rates didn't go up despite legalization and everything that we're hearing, and the fact that cannabis is becoming more normalized. So we did go back to perception of harm, parental disapproval, and peer disapproval to see what was happening with our trends. So cannabis has been our lowest in terms of perception of harm for years. But it was really interesting because that was the only substance where the perception of harm actually increased between 2021 and 2023. And you'll notice that alcohol, tobacco, and prescription drugs all went down from where they were 2 years ago. For parental disapproval, again, the same. Cannabis is the lowest, but that was the only data point that went up compared to the others that again trended downward. The good news is when you look at these numbers, 92% of our kids think that their parents would disapprove of them using alcohol. 96 think that their parents would disapprove of them using tobacco. 89 believe that their parents would disapprove of them using cannabis, and 97% think that their parents would disapprove of them using prescription drugs. So those are really high numbers. And it means that, parents are doing a good job of getting the message out saying, I don't want you to do these things. So it's just a matter of continuing to have those conversations. And of course, for peer disapproval, no surprise, cannabis is the lowest, but also the only one that actually went up over the last 2 years. So again, alcohol went down, tobacco went down, prescription drugs unfortunately went down, but cannabis went up in terms of more students thinking that their peers would disapprove of them using. A new question that we added onto our addendum this year was asking students if they were regular cannabis users and that they said that they'd used in the last 30 days. If they were using, how were they using? So we allowed students to select any or all that applied. So that's why it doesn't add up to 100%. But we did find that the most common method for students to use cannabis was through vaping it. And we were surprised to see it at 79%. We know that vaping and edibles are more of an emerging trend that are becoming more and more popular nationwide. But one of the things that we really are worried about, and I have some samples of what some of the products look like, is that these cannabis products, because they're vape devices, are cannabis concentrates. And they're usually a much more potent form of taking in the THC, which is that psychoactive substance found in cannabis. And they're usually between 80 and 40%, sometimes even more, sometimes even higher percent THC, as opposed to the top tier plants, which are usually around 20. And then when you go way back and think about like the Woodstock marijuana that people are used to, and that's typically what they think about when we talk about legalization and marijuana, that was around 2 to 3%. Even in the 80s, it got up to about 4%. And now we're seeing the plant form can go as high as 20. So you can see that the cannabis itself, the cannabis products have changed a lot over time. And part of the problem with the higher potency concentrates is there's still so little research about what the long-term effects are. We know that there's the risk of heavy metals and chemicals going into the lungs. We know that it's not really a vapor, it's an oil that turns into an aerosol, and that's going directly into the lungs. So lung health is definitely a concern. The heavy metals going into your body are definitely a concern. But there's also a concern about how potent this is and what the impact is going to be on the developing brain, or even for adults. There's the concern because there's just so little research out there. So there's definitely, the concern about paranoia. A lot of people will self-medicate for anxiety, but we found that the higher potency products may actually lead to stronger forms of anxiety, panic attacks, hallucinations, psychosis. And then there are other physical side effects, like it increases your heart rate, your blood pressure. And there's been a lot of cases of digestive issues and people not being able to hold food down as they get more and more addicted to these high potency cannabis concentrates. So there's definitely going to be more research coming. There's a lot of information kind of out there, but we don't have the studies in place to really be able to say for sure what the long-term impact is going to be. So something to keep on your radar in terms of the use rates and why we're a little bit more concerned about it being trending towards those high potency products. Another big thing that stood out this year was drinking and driving rates are unfortunately up. 7% of our students reported that they have driven after drinking once or more in the last 12 months. That was up from 4% 2 years ago. 18% of our 12th graders, we figured 12th graders are the ones who are most likely driving on a more regular basis, but 18% of them reported that they have driven after drinking once or more in the last 12 months. Now that was up from 9% in 2021. We went back to 2019 thinking that maybe 2021 was that COVID blip that I talked about earlier, but it was also 9% in 2019. So we've definitely doubled since before COVID. So it's definitely something to be concerned about, definitely something that we need to address. And 23% of our students have reported that they have ridden in a car with a driver who had been drinking at least once in the last 12 months. Now, we have no way of knowing if that is with a peer or if it's with a family member. We have no idea the age of the driver, but we know that 23% of our students have ridden in a car with somebody who had been drinking at least once in the last 12 months. Unfortunately, we have no idea how many of those students were in a car with a driver who had just been impaired across the board. So there's always the risk of somebody who's high or using prescription drugs while they're driving. And unfortunately, we don't have that number, just alcohol. So back in 2017, we worked with our Zen evaluator to create a more comprehensive way of measuring anxiety and depression, because there are questions in the Search Institute, but it really kind of tracks back to how often have you felt sad? And we felt like we wanted more concrete numbers. So what we did was we included the PHQ-4, which is a screening tool used by physicians to ask our students to kind of self-report their anxiety and depression to kind of get some more information that we can use to track different trends. So what it does is it tracks on a scale how often students have felt nervous, anxious, or on edge. They've been bothered by not being able to stop or control their worrying. They have been bothered by feeling down, depressed, or hopeless, or having little interest or pleasure in doing things. So with our survey data over time, we've really tracked that moderate to severe category. I will say that it went down this year, which is a good thing to see. So now we're at about 25% of our students who self-report to having moderate to severe forms of anxiety and or depression. I will say the most common is having anxiety and depression. Then the next highest category is just anxiety. And then the smallest category for moderate to severe is just depression. But a lot of times we're seeing them together, both anxiety and depression. So it's trended in the right direction. Still a big number that we need to work with and be concerned about. And for this one, we did break it down by gender. So we have our males and females, and our non-binary or gender fluid or other students. I will say with that number for non-binary, gender fluid, other, it is only 20 students. So it's a much smaller population, but still you can see that they're much more at risk for feeling those moderate to severe forms of anxiety and depression, followed by females and then males. And then when we break it down by those who identified as straight or those who identified as part of the LGBTQ plus population, we did again find that the LGBTQ plus population was definitely more at risk for feeling moderate to severe forms of anxiety and depression. And that was a bigger population than the 20 students who identified as non-binary gender fluid. For suicide attempts over time, this is something that we've been tracking for going back since 2009. It did trend downward from where we were in 2021, but you'll see that females are more likely to attempt at least once, and males less so, but we're at about 10% now. Still have a lot of work to do. That number has been kind of fluctuating quite a bit over time, but kind of hovering around that 9, 10, 11 percentage point range. A lot of times when we talk about things like this, people wonder how we compare to national averages or state averages. So we don't have the exact data point that we can compare easily, but I will say that approximately 9% of high school age youth have attempted in the last 12 months. So when we do our survey, it's over time. So it could have been in the last 12 months, it could have been 3 years ago. So it's not quite the same data comparison, but it does give you kind of an idea of what we're seeing at the national level. 2 years ago, we were also really lucky to get the blessing and work really closely with the school system to include questions that are more sensitive about sexual assault and sexual harassment, because this is something that we didn't have any data on, but we were concerned about it. So what we did was we worked to use the language they use in the health classes to have consistent language with something that they're comfortable with and something that they've heard. So we did include questions asking if they've ever been sexually assaulted, and we kind of gave some examples of that. The good news is that has also come down since 2021. So you'll see that we went from 12% to 11%, and we cut the 3 or more times in half by going from 4% to 2%. So trending in the right direction. I'm really thankful that we have the baseline data, and we're starting to get some trend data now to see what's happening with those trends. And this is just a sample, again, when we talk about comparing ourselves to others. So there are questions in the Youth Risk Behavior Survey that's done from the state of Connecticut, but you'll see that the questions don't exactly match up. So we really don't have data that we can compare ourselves to. And we can't compare ourselves to the other communities. So we're kind of in this lucky position where both Clinton and Guilford all do the survey, the same survey, the Search Institute, the same year. So it's always an odd year, and it's always in the fall, so right around the same time. But unfortunately, because this is part of our addendum, we don't have anything that we can compare because they're not asking these questions. When we break down the victim of sexual assault by numbers, so this one's a little bit different. Instead of just doing the percentage point, we put the numbers to it. Because again, that non-binary and gender fluid category is such a small percentage of students compared to male or female. But you'll see that we had more females that were sexually assaulted by number. But the highest percentage that we were seeing was definitely among the non-binary and gender fluid students. But you could also see that it's happening across the board. It's happening to males, it's happening to females, and it's happening to those who identify as non-binary or gender fluid. Again, with sexual harassment, we worked to use consistent language with what they were getting in their health classes. We also saw those numbers come down from where they were 2 years ago. So we went from 20% to 17% for once or twice, 14 to 12.5% for yes 3 or more times. And again, when we break it down by number, more females have been victims of sexual harassment, but percentage-wise, it was definitely our non-binary, gender fluid, or other students. And again, across the board, it's happening with males, it's happening to females, and it's happening to our non-binary and gender fluid students. 2 years ago, when we included the sexual assault and sexual harassment, we also included discrimination in asking students if they've ever been discriminated against based on their ethnicity, culture, or religion. We said that it could be verbal, written, physical, or visual. And so we have our baseline data. Unfortunately, once or twice didn't change from where we were 2 years ago, and 3 or more times actually went up from where we were 2 years ago. So good baseline data, alarming that it went up, especially for 3 or more times, and definitely something that, we need to think about as a community and see what we can do to impact those numbers. So the 40 developmental assets, and this is a huge basis for the survey tool that we use, but there are 20 internal and 20 external assets that are the building blocks and the fundamentals for youth growing up resilient, strong, and having the support systems in place to thrive. They're really important. We know that 49% of our students say that they have 21 to 40 assets, which is great, but we really need to work on those students who have the 0 to 10 and the 11 to 20, because we know that the more assets students have, the less likely they are to engage in risky behaviors. As we go into the assets, it's important to know that each one is carefully evaluated based on a series of questions. And I'll get into some examples. But sometimes, if an asset doesn't seem present in a young person's life, it could be that they responded to, I don't know, for one question, but I agree to a few others. So it's really detailed how we measure whether a student has assets or not, because it kind of has to boil down to an all or nothing type of a system to measure it. But we know that it's not really an all or nothing system when it comes to youth development. So we're going to kind of go over some examples and show you that. But just talking about why they're important, we know that the students that fall into really that 31 to 40 category, and even the 21 to 30, the more assets they have, the less likely they are to engage in risky behavior. So you'll see 21 to 30, they're engaging in about 1.8 risky behaviors. It's the 0.8 that gets me. So it's like they partially did it, but not fully. And for the 31 to 40, again, couldn't quite complete one risky behavior, but they were thinking about it. So you can see that the more we have in place, the better they are in terms of being protected against just making poor choices. Again, here's an example right from our Madison data. The more assets a student has, the less likely they are to engage in substance use. You can see if we can get all of our students to that 31 to 40, we would eliminate tobacco use, marijuana use, and prescription drug use, and only 15% of our kids would be drinking alcohol. So you can see, again, compared to the 0 to 10 category, how important building those assets are in our young people. And then on the flip side, the more assets the student has, the more likely they are to think that there's risk in doing some of those behaviors. So again, if we can get all of our students to that 31 to 40 category, almost all of them would think it's risky and none of them would be doing it. So in terms of our asset strengths, the things that we're doing really, really well as a community, and I think when you think about Madison, it's not a surprise when we look at this list, but school engagement, youth programs, achievement motivation, family support, positive peer influence, and integrity. So we have really hardworking, engaged, supported, honest young people, which is great. When it comes to our challenges, these are challenges that we see across the board too. So when we compare ourselves to, Clinton, Guilford, other communities, when we compare ourselves to what's happening nationally, unfortunately, a lot of times it's the same, but we're seeing restraint, parent involvement in schooling. I will say part of that is the fact that we're asking high schoolers, and as we know, as kids get older, their parents pull back a little bit more and let them kind of take the lead in terms of being in charge of their education, because they're getting ready to go off to college, and we're not going to as many meetings and not helping with homework as much. Sometimes we don't understand their homework, speaking for myself. We also know that community values youth is historically a low one. Again, it's kind of hard to think of, school full of 800 young people saying, yes, my community absolutely cares about what I'm doing and how involved I am, and I have a voice. Because being a high school student and being a teenager in a community is really hard to think about that global perspective and how valued you are. Creative activities, we do have amazing things in our community. When you think of Madison Arts Barn, you think of School of Rock. There's so many great theater or art programs out there, but it's just a matter of getting more kids to look for those creative activities. And reading for pleasure, unfortunately, is always our lowest. These are kids that are really busy, so I think reading for pleasure is sometimes the last thing they want to do. But 14% of our kids did read for pleasure, I will say. And we are asking during the school year and not during the summer, which I'm sure would be a little bit higher. And I am happy to report that number did go up from where it was 2 years ago. So we're going in the right direction. But again, we have an amazing library, so we just need to get more kids there. For our asset trends and what we've seen happen over time, we know that more of our kids are engaged in school. They have more of a positive peer influence. They care more about equality and social justice, and they care more about cultural competence. So we know that those things are growing in the right direction. For the things that have decreased, safety, which I'm going to go into more detail with, service to others, self-esteem, which I'm also going to go into more detail with, being involved in their religious community, and caring school climate, which I'm also going to go into a little bit more detail on. I want to use caring school community as really a way to kind of show you how the assets break down. So while it seemed, if we go back, that 30% of our kids saying that they feel like they have a caring school climate is really low, when we actually look question by question, the 3 questions that go into that asset are, my teachers really care about me, I get a lot of encouragement at my school, and students in my school care about me. When you look at the numbers, a majority of our students aren't saying disagree or strongly disagree. A lot of them are saying that they strongly agree or agree, and a lot of them are saying, I'm not sure. And I think that's a very typical, normal response. I think not just for teenagers, but for adults too. I think a lot of us are like, I don't know how other people feel about me. So when you look at it, if I were to go filling out the survey and I said, like, okay, I agree that my teachers care about me. I agree that I get a lot of encouragement at my school, but I'm not sure that my peers care about me. I'm not going to be reflected as somebody who has that asset, because I said I'm not sure to one of those. So you have to agree or strongly agree to all 3. So while it looks like something that we need to do a lot of work with, and we do, anything that seems like a lower number is definitely something to focus some attention on. It doesn't mean that 70% of our high school students strongly disagree that their teachers care, strongly disagree that they get a lot of encouragement, and strongly disagree that students in their school care about them. So I just wanted to give that as an example for how the assets shake out. For the gender-specific ones, self-esteem and safety are the 2 biggest assets that we see a huge gap between males and females. So they're both unfortunately trending in the wrong direction, but only 54% of our 54% of our males report to having high self-esteem versus only 28% for females. And for safety, 74% of males feel safe versus 48% of females who feel safe. So if we look at self-esteem over time, unfortunately, that gap is widening. The males are feeling better about themselves than they were 2 years ago, and females have been trending downward, except for a little increase back in 2015. But definitely something to be concerned about. For safety, again, there's 3 questions that go into it. In terms of never worrying about being hurt by somebody at home, never worrying about being hurt by somebody in school, and never worrying about walking around your neighborhood. So again, we can see that they're higher numbers, but the biggest gap there really is walking around your neighborhood. So it's something to be concerned about, and it's also something, we live in Madison. It feels like a relatively safe community, but we also have to think about, what it means to feel safe and to be safe, and what that feeling is. And I think there are even times where, my husband might feel safer walking around a neighborhood than I might feel safe walking around a neighborhood. And Are we talking about walking by ourselves? Are we talking about walking with a buddy? So there's so many different aspects that go into safety, but it really is important that we build a community where people know that they are allowed to feel safe and they should feel safe, and to continue to put those supports in place so that people feel safe going to school, going to a business, walking around downtown, and they don't feel like something's going to happen. So again, safety over time, big gap. It's starting to close because it did go up a little bit for females. Unfortunately, it came down a little bit for males, but hopefully we can trend in the right direction and build up that feeling of safety over time. And finally, this is our last big area of concern, but eating disorders. So 20% of our students surveyed reported that they've engaged in anorexic or bulimic behavior. For males, it was 11%, but for females, it was 29%. So unfortunately, those numbers, while they stayed fairly consistent until 2019, have gone up. For males, it came down a little bit in the last 2 years, but definitely concerned in terms of what we're seeing with our female population in particular there. And just the last area of concern is really just the impact of social media on young people. I think we've seen a lot of these behaviors kind of explode since social media has become more prevalent, not just in terms of bullying and harassment, but access to substances, different videos that they're seeing, trends that they're seeing. And there's a correlation between social media use and youth mental health. And of course, there's a correlation between youth mental health and substance use. And of course, there's a correlation between substance use and social media use. So they all kind of feed together as this vicious tornado, and they kind of feed off of each other. So it really is just something to be aware of, and it's something to continue to carry on the conversation about social media trends, what people are seeing, what it means to them, and helping young people even sort out what they're seeing online. And I'm going to turn it back over to Scott. And we're going to start to go through our student panel, which I know is what everybody came here for.
Thank you, Catherine. And so, I think we want to give our students a chance to take their turns and react to areas of the survey, and then we'll get into a more of a group discussion. So we'll go down the order that's here. So Trip, you want to get us started?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Trip Rizzo. I'm the senior board representative for Madison Youth and Family Services. And the topic that I was asked to discuss was alcohol and vaping and drunk driving, and touch on that and kind of my experience with it in high school. I'll start off with vaping and that kind of substance abuse. In my experience, I don't see it. I know that there are students that do it. But I think it's more of like a home thing. Like I don't walk into the school bathroom and it's just like every stall is full of kids vaping. I don't see it. Like when I go out into town, I don't necessarily see it. I definitely know that it's relevant and people are doing it. But I think it's really an at-home kind of thing and away from me. So I don't really have a lot of experience with kids vaping around me. Or at the school and in the community in general. I think it's definitely something that they keep to themselves. And then on that topic, switching to alcohol, in my experience with alcohol, like in the last, I want to say year, there are definitely like parties that are thrown in Madison with students that attend them, and there is alcohol at the parties. But I would say, I mean, maybe once every 4 months. I mean, there's maybe 3 a year. There's not a lot going on in Madison where a bunch of kids are like getting together and just drinking. Like it doesn't happen very often. And if it does, like most of the time, like it's in a controlled environment. And then speaking on that, like the 3 times it may happen a year that, kids are drinking. This is just from my experience, kids may be drinking every weekend, but from what I know is like the school like when the whole school gets together, it may be like 3 times a year. And in terms of like drunk driving, that stat actually really surprised me, that it was like 23% of kids said they were getting in cars with people who were drunk driving, and 18% of seniors were saying that they do drunk drive, just because at these events like I know a lot, at least my friends are very, very cognizant about drunk driving. Like if someone's making the decision to drink that night, at least in my grade and my friend group, like people are very, very careful with that. I think some students make the decision to drink alcohol, and that's their decision. But when it comes to drunk driving, a lot of my peers at least know, like, this is where we draw the line. Like, I'm not getting into a car with somebody who's been drinking, or if I'm going to a party, like somebody has to be a designated driver, or we have to get a ride from somebody else. So like I know of situations where, kids have been there and they have been drinking, and then they call a parent and say like, hey, I know I've been drinking, but I need a ride. Like, it's not safe for me to drive or operate a vehicle. So that did definitely surprise me, just because in the experiences I've had with alcohol and kids drinking around me, like, it's drunk driving has never been like something I've been concerned about. People have been very, very careful about that. But then again, alcohol, I mean, literally maybe 3 times a year do students really get together and drink. And but besides that, I really don't know of a lot of alcohol being consumed throughout the school year. So that's my 2 cents on those two subjects. But thank you guys.
Thank you, Trip. So going down the list, Lily.
Hi, so I'm talking about assets in the community, and almost everyone I know does some extracurricular or does sports. So whether it's like fencing, swim, cross country, football, anything along those lines, or something more artsy like playing instruments or doing any like painting or drawing. I know that people are very involved with extracurriculars and clubs, and many also are very involved academically, doing studying, reading, and stuff along the likes of that. I think that most people like to do clubs and sports, and by doing that, they have a lot of assets that they do. And I know many people who like do 3 sports at once. I think that lots of people like to get involved in the community by doing volunteer work or by just doing clubs that are offered by our school, which there's a wide variety of. Although some of my friends did say that they would like to see more extracurriculars that have to do with arts and stuff like that. So that's my experience with people and assets.
Nice job. Thank you, Lily. Chris.
Hi, sorry. My name is Chris Bonavita, and I'm a senior as well. And I'm talking about mental health here at Daniel Hand. And I wanted to start off with social media. I think that there's a big pressure with expectations. I know as Catherine talked about, with expectations on social media and unrealistic standards, which I know has contributed to like self-esteem, especially, which I know, again, Catherine talked about, but the numbers going down for self-esteem percentage in females and up for males slightly. I think that definitely has a correlation to social media. Also, I think at school, I think that they're doing a good job with the helping hallway, but I think they could improve promotion of it, because a lot of people know it's there, but I don't think people really understand its purpose and the reliability of it, because it does have some extremely valuable resources, but I don't think many people take advantage of that. And then also, like, adding on to what Lily was saying about assets, I think clubs do a very good job at promoting themselves. Like the hallways are like littered with posters everywhere and promoting the clubs. Come to this club on this day, this club on another day. And I think that's a very good resource for students to gain these assets and to be able to find like a good group of people to be around, which is something that a lot of people need, obviously. And then also with assets, I was thinking teachers I've seen it actually get better from freshman year to senior year, but with availability of teachers after school, before school, during free periods, everything. I think it's definitely gotten better, but I think it could get even better by like maybe having some sort of strict, like, or not like a strict schedule, but like just a more open schedule to like seeing, so the students can see like when they're free and when they could come visit and stuff like that for extra help. And also like being understanding with extensions and deadlines, especially like mental health, with mental health like reasons, like if somebody's just having like a really rough week and they need to push a lot of stuff back, I think that could be something that could be a little more, that could just be a little bit better done by teachers. And then also I was thinking, as my last thing, I was thinking that the normalization of talking about mental health, I think, has gotten better with advisory. I know specifically in my advisory, we're very open, but I've heard from a lot of my friends who are in other advisory classes that it's not that way at all. And I think maybe it could be good to do like larger assemblies or larger group things to just like have more like sort of as a community to come together to talk about mental health, but also to promote it more in these small groups and to try to get closer with these advisory groups. I know, I mean, it started this year for me as a senior, but I'm sure it could definitely get better throughout the people who are freshmen now and then growing through high school with advisory. I hope that can be something that can be properly used. But yeah.
Thank you, Chris. Mental health continues to be dogged by stigma. And, you see this in the adult population, you certainly see this in the youth population. So it's, as Chris was saying, it shouldn't be overlooked in terms of a point here that we have to continue to bring these conversations up and talk more openly as a society about mental health. Those issues have not they've not gone away or gotten substantially better. Thank you, Chris. And Millie.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm going to be talking about sexual harassment, sexual violence, sexual assault. So as we saw in the statistics, there's a really large feeling against females of maybe not feeling as safe at hand. Well, I wouldn't say a large number, but definitely higher than we'd want. And I'd have to say this has to do with just an environment perpetuated by the student body and just the community as a whole, because a lot of girls just really feel like when something happens to them, it's really hard for them to speak out because they just don't know where to go, because Madison has some amazing resources for things like when this happens, but unfortunately a lot of girls and boys don't know how to access them, and they just feel really helpless in these situations. And then also what I've noticed is a lot of girls will face a lot of persecution when they speak up, because a lot of times with sexual harassment, it can be just brushed under the rug and not really seen as, since it wasn't assault, people just kind of say, oh, it wasn't assault. But it still is such a major issue, and they face a lot of pushback when they speak up and can be sometimes bullied, or not bullied, but in some ways, yes, for speaking out. So I think really developing our resources and our response system when something like this happens, because there are a good amount of girls that feel that if they were to come forward and speak, that there wouldn't be much done, there wouldn't be much resources, and that it wouldn't really have much effect. So I think there's just an overwhelming feeling of helplessness, and because of that helplessness, it allows sexual assault rates to rise, because the few individuals that do things like this can take advantage of this helplessness and really victimize girls and boys that don't really know where to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Millie. And we can talk more about this when we get into the discussion. You're bringing up a lot of very important points. Nora.
Hi, I'm Nora Hughes. I'm the junior student rep for the Madison Youth Board, and I'm going to be talking about self-esteem, eating disorders, and safety in the hand community. I know Chris touched on the self-esteem aspect, and I agreed with what he had to say about social media definitely having effect on that. I think there are a lot of unattainable standards that students feel they have to meet that I think definitely affects self-esteem. And I think this directly connects to eating disorders. I think many people, at least that I've seen, have engaged in some unhealthy eating habits. Something good that I have seen is that I think conversations about eating habits tend to be positive and encouraging good habits. So normally I think if someone is dealing with this, it's more of like an internalized experience that they're maybe scared to speak out about or not telling other people about. And as for safety, I think for the decrease or the widening difference that we saw between females and males, I think that girls our age are tend to be taught kind of habits to just like always be alert when they're alone or just different things like that. I know I personally have been. So I think that maybe can cause girls to just naturally feel a little bit unsafe or like they always have to be on guard, which I think could have caused some of those differences in the numbers. And I think like Catherine also mentioned how she said like sometimes if she's with her husband may naturally feel safer. I also definitely think that's something that's going on with males and females at hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. Mr. Salutary. So we've gotten through our students, and thank you all. Great job. I'm going to just give Mr. Salutary a chance if there's anything that you'd like to remark on in terms of the whether it's some of the survey data that stands out to you, some of the comments of the students, and then we'll get into a discussion.
First, I appreciate the invite tonight and the opportunity to be part of the panel. I love hearing the student input. That's always really important to us, and I appreciate it. I do really appreciate the survey every couple of years because it really gets us to focus on, what we're going to work on moving forward. We're doing a lot of work, obviously, with Catherine and with you, Scott. Our advisors for our advisory program are working with student leadership. That's a big piece tomorrow. Mr. Bodner just scheduled a Choices Matters a presentation that is really powerful that's going to address that topic of drinking and especially getting in the car with others who have been drinking. That's scheduled in April as a response, which I think is really positive. And the student input's really important. And the one thing I like to share is we usually hear if anything gets reported, nothing happens. That's never the case. We always fully investigate and always respond. We just can't share what we do. That piece is confidential with our approach, and that's a really important piece. So if there are anything that's really going on that's concerning, and keeping in mind that the data from the survey is not all about the high school. It's about the community, it's about the family and the high school. So that's another important piece, but we really appreciate when students and parents share what's going on. I think the low self-esteem, the feeling or lack of feeling of safety, eating disorders as well. I mean, drug use is always a concern, but those numbers are highly concerning, and that's why we're working on how to share this information with our students and encourage them to not only make better decisions, but empower our parents, like our PTO meeting Tuesday. If people can attend, Catherine and Scott will be talking about what parents can do to help develop the assets, because obviously you saw the statistics. The more assets a student has, the better choices they make and the healthier they are. So this is a lot of great work, and the students, I commend all of you for being brave enough to be on a recorded Zoom and share your thoughts. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, I thank you, Mr. Salutary. It always, each time that we go through this data and we do these presentations, there's always some part of it that stands out to me differently. And I think what I would point out is so much of what we are seeing they're really the result of cultural forces. Like there's things that are acting on our society and on our kids that result in what we're seeing here. And, would highlight Millie's point about, how it feels if you are the victim of some type of harassment, you know, how do you identify that? How do you, if it happens with some frequency, if it's just sort of a part of a culture, you don't necessarily recognize it as unhealthy or even bad until something triggers something in you. If the harassment gets more severe, or someone points out to someone like, hey, that's not okay. You don't need to put up with that. You know, the stigma then forces or pushes back on a person to feel safe and secure to bring that up. And I think the important point of this conversation is, much what Mr. Salutieri just pointed out, and what we can also say from Madison Youth and Family Services. When we're aware of these things, we act on them. When we support kids to do, in some cases, what they're ready and willing to do to report something, and obviously follow what we need to do legally at times. So I think the point is, how do we get more of these conversations going, help young people feel safe, so that when something does happen, that they are getting the help that they need, whether that's mental health or whether it's, in the cases where they feel like they're being a victim of some kind of harassment or bullying or, God forbid, assault. So with that, I want to again thank everyone for being a part of tonight, and I do want to get into questions. So there's a couple that went in here early on, so we'll do two that went into the chat, and then open it up for the group. And I'm not sure the best way to do this. I think maybe if you want to come off mute or put your hand up, that might be the easiest way for us to see you when we get to that. But so Seth Klaskin, who serves on the Board of Ed, regarding the cannabis numbers, do the surveys make a distinction between medical uses versus recreational uses? Query whether the reason the perceived harm, peer disapproval, approval, and parental disapproval numbers may be skewed a bit lower due to the survey participants being confused as to whether the survey questions are intended to include prescribed uses versus pure recreational. You want to take a shot at that, Catherine?
Sure. So because it's a national and international survey tool, they don't distinguish the difference between medical use or adult use cannabis. So they don't distinguish the difference. But it's interesting that now that it has been legalized in our state, we're starting to see the peer and parental disapproval and the perception of harm actually increase. So it's actually going in the right direction, even though we've legalized for adult use purposes. But I can see how there could be some confusion there, but I think it's unfortunately one of those things that we're trying to feel our way through, because it is legal for medical purposes for a certain percentage of the population. I don't know how widespread that is among even high school age youth, but I could see how it could be confusing that it's a medication or used for adult use purposes.
I think we are definitely ramping up the information we're trying to get to young people about cannabis, and trying to educate them, particularly when it comes to these higher potency products, which, for them, they may be accessing them through a dispensary, which you would think is safer, and likely they relatively are, in terms of not being, potentially combined with like fentanyl, things like that, God forbid. But youth are more likely accessing their cannabis from more black market types of options. So, that's concerning, and we are certainly doing our best to educate kids and educate parents as to, that this isn't your grandparents' pot. I can't make that point enough. This isn't Cheech and Chong pot, Grateful Dead pot. This is, this is better cannabis through chemistry. These are substances that are being altered in ways that really intensify their effects. And we really don't know longitudinally how they're going to impact a developing brain. So we'll move off of that soapbox for a minute, get back to some of the questions. The next one, is there still a Safe Rides program? If so, does it apply to cannabis use in addition to drinking? Safe Rides was a program we ran for many, many years through Youth and Family Services. It included a group of volunteer drivers that would stay in our office actually on Friday and Saturday nights. They would take anonymous calls from any youth in the community, and it didn't matter whether their concern in terms of getting a ride was due to a driver that was under the influence. It also included a driver that felt like a youth who was calling because their ride was unsafe for any reason. So we had kids who would sometimes call us up because they were babysitting and the parents came home and they were concerned because maybe when the parents came home, they may have been under the influence of alcohol or just felt unsafe in general with someone driving them home. That maybe was the plan. The Safe Rides program we had to discontinue, as you might not be surprised, during the pandemic. We couldn't run it. It was a very difficult program to run because some of the legal exposure and things like there was a lot of behind the things that were problematic. We reallocated some of the resources for Safe Rides after the pandemic. We shifted some of our prevention staff work towards programming for younger kids. So now some of the resources that used to go to Safe Rides now are reallocated to doing mindfulness classes with elementary school age kids, with groups that we're running in the lower middle schools. So it's come up, the question has come up as to whether or not we should look at that again. Certainly we are open to it. I think right now we want to make sure that we're doing as much education on the issue as we can, and that we are living in a time now where there are other options for youth to get rides that didn't exist when Safe Rides was created. We certainly had not always had an Uber and things like that young people can also access now that's safe. So open to it. And right now we just want to focus on education. Do we have any hands raised in the group?
We do not.
Okay, so I'm going to continue with the questions that are in our Q&A. So from Chris Song, for the students, what ideas do you have in mitigating the effects of social media? Great question. Should more be done by MYFS and others in town to promote healthy tech and social media use? I would just say yes to that myself. How has limiting phone usage in the school affected the school and school well-being? So what would be, and well, whichever student maybe would like to take this, are there more things we could do? And how has the school policy around the limiting the phone usage been an effect on student well-being?
I can touch on this a little bit, just because in terms of social media and what we should do about it, Nora and I at least have been talking about this since the beginning of the year, just because this has been one of the bigger topics. And I think that throughout the course of the year, that's going to be something that at least we focus on in terms of helping to solve, because I mean, it is a big issue because everyone's on social media and everyone sees everything. But I wanted to really touch on the last part with the limiting the phone usage in school, just because I think that's like that first step that I've seen where social media it's taken a positive turn. And it's just a small thing, right? Where like you can't use your phone for that 5 minutes between class ending and class starting, but those 5 minutes have led to kids, conversing and talking, compared to like last year when you had a free 2 minutes in class, like you would automatically flip your phone on and go on Instagram. And that alone has cut down on social media usage by a pretty significant amount, believe it or not. So I think that's the first like kind of baby step in terms of helping to stop like this social media distraction and kids' mental health being destroyed from social media, is the fact that in school now we're not using as much. We're just not even seeing social media as much because of that new rule. So I think that's been a great thing, but I think it's a really good question, and it's definitely something that we're going to focus on going forward this year. So
yeah. Oh, also
Go
to
ahead.
comment on this, I think it's such an important issue, and one of the biggest places I actually see kids like staying off their phones and really getting involved is just school events, sporting events, things like that. Kids really like just get involved and aren't on social media, and I know it sounds like such a normal thing, but it has such a great effect because when kids go home, they might just sit on social media for hours even, and when they go to these events, they're really learning, or not learning, but they're improving their skills to just not be on social media during social interactions, and they're really just having fun in the moment.
Great point. And I think we are constantly looking for new and creative ways to, support young people to have alternatives to social media. There is an aspect of social media that is, you know, in a way supportive and informative. So taking advantage of the best parts of social media versus, and protecting yourself from some of the bad effects and bad influences that it can be. And always open to what other ideas that we can do and help not just youth, but parents, adults. I don't know about you all, but I could think of several adults in my personal life that have a lot of unhealthy habits when it relates to cell phone use and internet and social media. So it's something that we all need to continue to work on. Want to get back to the questions. Matthew Gordon, by the way, a member of Board of Finance in town, wants to thank the students for their insightful and thoughtful and candid commentary. Absolutely would echo that. Thank you, Matt. And a question: has the percentage of teens who engage in self-harm behaviors like cutting been measured in this survey? And a thank you for the caring work. Catherine, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, so we haven't, the Search Institute survey doesn't include a question about self-harm. We did include a question from a different screening tool similar to the PHQ-4. It's the PHQ-9. We did include a question that it doesn't specifically talk about the act of hurting yourself, but thinking about it. And those numbers were relatively low compared to some others, but it was kind of a broader question. So nothing specifically like how many times in the past 6 months, 12 months, 30 days have you harmed yourself? But it is something that we've thought about putting on surveys in the past. Part of the problem is when we get to survey time, we have about 1,000 questions that we want to ask, and we can't fit them all in, but it's definitely one that we've been thinking about and weighing carefully in terms of how we would phrase it and how we would measure it.
Thank you, Catherine. So we do have an anonymous question, which I do think is appropriate to read, and it is a thought regarding what Mr. Salutary had talked about in terms of how the school investigates and takes action. I think in response to harassment reports, I think this is what that refers to. Understanding the need for confidentiality. A lot of students know, despite the fact that there's confidentiality, a lot of students will apparently know about if something has happened, and that the lack of visible action, community response, and discourse could send or she's saying does send an unintended message to students that what happened isn't important or valued. Silence speaks volumes, and oftentimes it makes students feel unsafe. Mr. Salutary, would you want to speak to that?
Sure, Scott, thanks. That I don't disagree with the anonymous input. I will say, we're bound by confidentiality laws and FERPA, and we're not allowed to share the information. Whatever is out there with the student body and the community, that is not disclosed by us. And, I do ask that, when people want information to be shared by the school, as an example, like just think about if it was your child who was involved, would you want us sharing the information about something that involved your child negatively? And I believe most people, if not everyone, would say no, but we're bound by confidentiality laws and by FERPA. And, we share what we can, but we have to, follow that practice as it's appropriate and required. But I don't disagree. Sometimes I do think if we were able to share everything, it would be helpful, but we're not allowed to do that. And, I certainly respect the input from that particular person. And I'm just saying person because they're anonymous and I'm not avoiding a name.
Yeah. Sorry. To
No,
also comment
go ahead,
on
Ellie.
this. To also comment on this. Another thing I've noticed is we hear, or among the student body, we hear so much more when unfortunately the school wasn't able to help based on just a lack of proof, or the situation just didn't fit their realm of control. And we students hear a lot about those situations, but a lot of times when things are taken care of, I mean, there's no really reason for them to be told. So a lot of people keep those more private. So I think it definitely does generate a more negative perception of how these things are dealt with. But I would say that the reputation doesn't entirely represent the actions that are being taken.
Yeah, I can tell you in the situations that I've been aware of, you know, as part of my role at Youth and Family and as a therapist here in town for many, many years, you know, there are things that do happen that will start to take some movement on social media and become talking points. And what's obvious is that, you know, when people hear of things, it can generate a lot of like a rumor mill going very quickly. And sometimes people are very aware of certain aspects of a situation and speak to those. And then you can just see like assumptions and other things that are getting tied to things that generally are not that helpfully or that healthy. So it is, I think, challenging. And having been a parent in this town too, I can speak to this, where, you know, it is hard sometimes for us not to want to shout at the rooftops if we hear or see something that we're worried about or scared about, and still that none of us would know all the details. And when it comes to kids, there's so much more that's protected, and for good reason. So if we are accepting that that is a value, that's critical. And then what maybe we say or what we don't say even more on social media becomes more important. Very difficult, very challenging. Like, we're all dealing with this. It's not easy, but it is important for us to know that no matter what we're hearing out in the world and the news, particularly on social media, is not necessarily fact, and need to be cautious with that. All right, I want to get back into questions, and we have a few minutes left, so we'll see how much more we can get through. From our own Justin Ziegler. He's one of our staff who works very closely, I think, with some of the youth on this panel. He wants to know what's the best part of living in Madison. Who wants to take that?
For me, I think it's the support system that we all have. I feel like at hand, it definitely feels like a close community, whether it's, I play 2 sports at hand. I also used to be a part of different music clubs. So I think just for all of the things I've been a part of, I definitely feel supported by not only other students, but adults in the community. And it really is an awesome feeling. So that's definitely my favorite part.
I was also gonna say something similar to that with like having sports teams, and I do like cross country, indoor track, and outdoor track. So I'm with like this one group, similar group of kids for basically the whole school year, and it's good to be able to have all those opportunities, especially in the school system. And I mean, like Roots Club, Peer Advocates, there's a lot offered by Madison Youth, and additionally, just like I said earlier, like there's countless clubs in hand, but also definitely like being in the town of Madison itself, like being close to like New York City, New Haven, Boston, like being able to travel, and also just in our own town, the beaches and like all the trails up north and stuff. So yeah, I think there's a lot of good opportunities.
Nice. Any other thoughts? All right. Is there a concern about teens texting and driving, and any statistics available about the prevalence? Thank you all. Catherine, we don't have any questions about texting and driving, correct?
We do not.
But yes, there is a concern. I think one that we do, I think as drivers out there, that we are seeing distracted driving all over the place, and teenagers as new drivers are probably more in terms of the focus, but I think in general, one that we're all paying attention to. To the students, is there a general fear or anxiety shared by students or some students about gun violence in schools, how are the students coping with those fears?
I think this is a pretty big topic. I think we're really, really privileged in Madison and at hand to not really have to worry about that sort of thing. Obviously, when it comes up on the news, it's something that, you know, crosses your mind. But then again, we are very, very privileged to live in a town where, you know, we have security officers at the school that, you know, we feel safe around, and just the student body at hand, and the teachers and the support system like Madison Youth, where we don't really see. I mean, me personally, like I don't fear, you know, going to school or gun violence in schools, which is honestly a very lucky thing, unfortunately, now in America. But it's something that I'm very privileged to have in Madison, and so I think that's something that we have going for us, is that we don't really have to worry about that. But then again, it does, you know, if it pops on the news, it can cross people's minds, and to cope with those fears, like, there at Madison Youth, there are a ton of, you know, you can just walk in and there's a ton of services. If you see something, say something. We have a Say Something week at school. We have a Say Something club at school. So, and that's part of the Sandy Hook Promise. So they do a lot of great stuff there, and Madison Youth combined, to help with those kind of fears going on. If anyone does have them, there are resources for that, but we're very privileged not to have a ton. So.
Thank you, Trip. So it's interesting to me because sometimes adults will see the amount of security, particularly around the high school, and remark in terms of their own experience, and feeling like, you know, the presence of security sometimes might make them remember that, you know, we're living in the world that we're living. I'm just curious, from the students, what's your sense when you see the security presence at the school? Is that something that you feel generally helps you feel? Is that become normal? Does it help you to feel safer, or does it have any other kind of effect on how you feel day to day? I'm just curious if any of you would remark to that.
I was actually thinking today, I went to the security office because I noticed there's like a little scratch on the front of my car, and I was just thinking, like, by chance, like, could this have happened at school? So I think just by that availability and that access, I think it speaks measures to, I mean, we have security cameras all around the school, in school and outside of school. They were able to like effortlessly just pull up like this camera from right where my car is and show like, and all the contact, and nothing happened at school. I don't know where it happened, honestly, but I just think that it speaks measures to the security that we have at hand. And again, walking into the building every single day and walking right by security officers, they hold the door open for us. I think it just, and like also there's a police car in the front circle every day in the morning too. So I think it feels like a safe environment from the start based off of that. So yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say I agree. And I also think that the security guards also have become like a friendly face to us, and someone that personally, like, I can talk to just about my day, and they're just other adults in the building that we have like to go to, but they also make us feel safe. So I think that they do a great job and definitely improve the like climate in the school.
Thank you. Thank you both. So we are just about at 8 o'clock, and we thought maybe up to 90 minutes for this presentation tonight. Well, there is one last comment, which is from Pam Davies. Thank you so much for the presentation. Thanks to Catherine and I. You're welcome, Pam. And to all the students, thank you for sharing your experience. I'm so glad that you are collecting and responding to this data. I'm very grateful that we have MYFS helping in the community. No better way in terms of way I would consider is ending it better than that. I want to say thanks to the Madison Youth and Family Services Board. We had some representatives here tonight, so would not want to overlook an opportunity to say thanks to all the folks that are involved with our board. Huge thanks to our students. Great job for your candor and your honesty and your courage. Big thanks to Mr. Salutary, who is never shy to speak to an issue or question. Appreciate that. And thank you to all. We've had, I'd say, almost still 80% of the folks that started on this call are still on. Hopefully you're all still with us. But thank you for joining us tonight. Always feel free to reach out to Madison Youth and Family Services or to the high school if you have further questions about this. keep an eye out for the things that we're doing, and always join us in keeping this town as happy and as healthy as possible. With that, good night, everybody.